Hi, I'm Mayor Jim Darling in this meeting with the mayor, and today we have a very special guest, Congressman Henry Cuellar. Welcome, Congressman.
Mayor, it's always a pleasure being with you. Thank you.
Now, not including McAllen, you go to Laredo along the coast, I guess, and then zip up towards San Antonio?
All the way up to northeast San Antonio and everything in between there. So it's a large district, it's different because, the border area, the four border counties that I represent, is different from the rural areas. And then, of course, then you got the San Antonio bigger area, and I got military bases there and Randolph Air Force Base, for example. So it's a very different type of district.
That would keep you pretty busy because there's a lot of different interests that you have to act as a proponent in Washington.
It's interesting because, for example, if we say no to the border wall, there's some folks in the Northern District that say yes to the border wall. And so, yeah, it's a very different type. And then if you go into the rural areas, then it's a different type of priorities that they have there.
I think, I've heard you about border wall, kind of the same philosophy as it's really what the Border Patrol needs. If they think it should be here, there, but electronic and more Border Patrol people, and really an overall border protection program, not just built on one aspect of it.
Yeah, what we want is we believe in law and order at the border. We don't want chaos. We want to make sure that we control our border. Every country has the right to control its borders, but it's how we secure the border. If you put 1 mile of fencing, it could cost $25 to $26 million per mile. If you use that money to hire personnel, to buy technology, you could cover a whole bunch of miles with that. So it's a matter of how you secure the border. And plus, why do we always play defense on the 1 yard line called the U.S.-Mexico border? Why not play defense on their 20-yard line, work with Mexico, Guatemala, and those countries, stop people before they actually come to our border?
There was a Tri-Mexa program with the Northern Triangle. I think it had millions of dollars dedicated to. We didn't spend very much money over there, but that was exactly the point. But make sure you watch the money. Don't just give it to them. You have to make sure that it goes for criminal justice and economic development.
Yes, actually, I was involved with K-Ranger back after the 2014 when the Yon Company kids were coming in. We started up with $750 million. I think right now it's about $530 million per year. We don't give them cash. We never do that. In fact, a lot of that, we work through nonprofits and certain NGOs that a lot of them are American. So the money actually ends up back in the U.S. one way or the other, working with those NGOs. And we want to make sure that we provide the security, but at the same time try to raise up their level. It's not only the social programs, but if you look at it, one of the reasons you also have like sort of the rural areas from Honduras and other places that are coming in, they've had some droughts that have hit them very hard. So if they cannot grow any crops there, then they start looking for places to go. And unfortunately, sometimes they come over to the U.S. And so we got to do a way that we can help those countries. And again, compared to what we give some countries, it's a small amount. For example, the three countries receive about $530 million a year. Countries like Israel gets $3.5 billion a year. So I mean, so when people say watch what you do, it's just keep in mind it's all a matter of perspective as to how we try to help those countries, and it's for our best interest. I think it's better to play defense on their 20-yard line than the 1 yard line called the U.S.-Mexico border.
I always talk it. It's our hemisphere.
Yeah,
right? Let's take care of our hemisphere.
And it's interesting because you said something, while we're paying attention to other parts of the world, there are certain things happening in Central America. In fact, I added some language last year to the National Defense Authorization to see what Iran, Russia, and China are doing in those countries in Central America. And as, for example, we were with the president of El Salvador. China wanted to come in with the former president, and they wanted to either buy or long lease 99 years, about 73% of Salvador's coastal land. Imagine if some country would come to the United States and they wanted to either buy or long lease 99 years, 73% of our coastal property. So we have to look and keep an eye in Central America and South America and Latin America, because it's our own backyard. And if we don't watch what happens one day, we could wake up and see certain actors down there that might be against our own interest.
And you look at a lot of the problems were caused by our drug habit. That's where the money flows there, and you
Absolutely.
know, it's a problem that we really need to get a hold of in this country, and you know, also try to stop the flow coming in. But really, as long as there's demand, of any country in the world, we ought to understand the law of supply and demand. And
You know, Mayor, you're absolutely right. A lot of people say, oh, those countries need to do more, they need to do more. But keep in mind, it's our U.S. consumption of drugs, where there are literally billions and billions of dollars of profits that we send down to Mexico and other parts of the world because of our drug consumption. And what happens is drugs come in from the southern border and coastal and other places, and what we send back is cash and guns. In fact, there's big weapons that go back that the cartels use. 80% of that come from the United States, and about 40% of those guns that they take away from the drug cartels are actually from the state of Texas.
Yeah, so it's all one. As I say, it's our whatever. It's always a little effect on here has something over here, and that's really what we're dealing with. And we see more at the border, I think, than people. Up
Yeah,
north.
and you're right, Mayor. If you look at it, remember the 1980s when they had shows like Miami Vice and all that? They would show how the fast boats, they had drugs coming in through Florida and the Caribbean. Then the U.S. put a lot of resources there. Then they found they found those drugs coming through the southern border itself. So they're coming in now through the southern border. And when people say put a wall, it's going to stop the drugs, keep in mind that most drugs come through ports of entry. So even if you put a wall, most drugs are going to come through the port of entry. And keep in mind that there are submarines, there are fast boats that are using the coasts also of the United States to bring in drugs also.
I always thought our approach to drug prevention was misguided. It was say no to drugs. Drugs are bad. Actually, what happens is drugs are really good from a standpoint, if you get a hook to them, they'll take over your life. You know, I always thought a commercial was say no to, well, you know why I don't do drugs? Because you might like them. You know, and it's so powerful with the new drugs now. I mean, you can't stop every interaction with drugs. And so if it happens a relatively small amount of time, you're addicted. And you will give up everything for the drugs.
Look what happened with the opioid crisis that we have. Let's look at the fentanyl that's coming in. A lot of it comes from China. For a while, most of that was coming in through the postal service itself. So again, I mean, we saw pain medication that got prescribed and people got hooked on it. Yeah. And we got a big crisis across the United States.
And what could be more of a detriment than seeing people drop dead from overdosing of fentanyl? It didn't stop people from doing it.
Yes.
You know, it's so powerful. And I think, you know, some education from that standpoint is if you start, you can't stop. And you do terrible things with your life when you do. But
especially with the new synthetic drugs that they're using, they're powerful, like you're saying, and they can kill. All you need is a low drop and they can kill you.
We were talking about point of entries and thinking of that because when they search a car, when the fentanyl was coming across, it could kill the dog or even the Customs and Border Protection guy open the trunk, and if it's loose or whatever, and they inhale it. So that's not an easy job being on the border. And you know, I know you're interested in funding and Customs and Border Protection and whether the government gives enough money to that section.
Right, and I sit on I'm the vice chair of the Homeland Appropriations. This year we added, Mayor, 1,200 new CBP officers, which is good for our ports of entry in the valley and other places across the southern border, because we need more CBP officers, number one. So we added money for 1,200 new CBP officers. We added money to hire 240 ag specialists. You know, let's say FAR, for example, or areas where you have produce, you got to have those ag specialists. I also added money to hire about 200 new Border Patrol specialists. And what they are, those are the people that will be at the Border Patrol immigration centers. So instead of what they did last April, where they brought in the CBP officers, our trained professionals, or Border Patrol to go work at those Border Patrol centers, like they have one here in McAllen, instead of changing diapers or making sandwiches or inputting information, now we have this new positions that will do that, and then we leave our men and women at our ports so they can keep moving trade efficiently.
Yeah, our Hidalgo Bridge, which the city owns, was one of the major points for that, people seeking asylum. And they actually had a bulletin board, and it had the name of the asylum seeker, the drugs that they were, the prescription that they had, and their doses and when they're supposed to take it on the bulletin board. And so we turned those guys into nurses, or
Exactly.
They
were trained.
If you went down, you felt terrible for them.
Yeah,
because it wasn't the job that they were doing, and they tried. I mean, when you hear all the bad stories, those guys were really trying to make it under the best conditions they could for the people that they were serving.
I agree. I mean, we got professionals that work for CBP, for ICE, for Border Patrol, Air Marine. Those are men and women. It's not an easy job. It's not an easy job. So, I mean, I just like you and I, we support the work that they do to secure our border.
Now, Washington did some monumental things this week. We passed a budget for the first time in a couple of years, I guess, instead of a continuing resolution. USMCA or Nafta 2, and then, of course, the other things that are dealing in Washington. Let's talk about Nafta 2, USMCA, and the importance that's going to be on the border.
You know, every day there's more than $1.7 billion of trade between the U.S. and Mexico. That's over $1 million every single minute. We see this in the Valley. We see this up and down the border. Trade with Mexico is very important. So this new, what I call NAFTA 2.0, provides a new stability, predictability, which if you talk to some of your CBP officers, they would tell you that certain areas are going to grow 3 to 5% a year, and this is good. We need this trade between the U.S. and Mexico. When you put the U.S., Mexico, and Canada as a region, we're a powerhouse across the world. And this is why I'm excited about that. We also passed the appropriations, all 12 appropriation bills. And that's important because I mentioned monies for Homeland, money for our military, even though the president wants to take another $3.5 billion away from the military for the border wall. But we added money for that. We added for the military. We added money for Pell Grants, which are important for our college. Gear Up, a lot of the areas. A lot of the highway dollars, even though we need more, we added money. A lot of the projects are 80-20. 80% federal dollars, 20% from the state, and of course anything that comes from the local governments. So, we passed the 12 appropriation bills, which is again something that we don't want to have a shutdown. The last time the president wanted a shutdown over the wall, as you notice this time there was no drama. We passed the appropriation bill, no shutdown. And unfortunately, the president is looking at taking billions of dollars to build the border wall, which is his campaign promise. The only thing he forgot about the campaign promise was that Mexico was supposed to pay for this wall. It's the American taxpayers who are paying for this.
Yeah, we don't want to talk about that. That affected McAllen directly. Some of the rhetoric that went on. We're the largest sales tax collector in the state of Texas almost every year. And when that happened, we saw a significant drop in tourism. We saw that in McAllen and other places. Look, a couple years ago, Mexico had about over 18 million Mexicanos that would come over to the U.S. to spend money. They were spending over $19 billion a year from those 18 million Mexicanos. But if somebody calls them rapists and murderers, then some people are not going to show up. And we saw a drop from 18 million Mexicanos to 17 million Mexicanos. When you drop by 1 million, that means places like McAllen and other places, San Antonio, are going to see a drop of people going to the stores, to the malls, to the restaurants, to the hotels. Because, I mean, if you lose 1 million people coming in, that's a lot of money. It's kind of interesting. It's almost like a love-hate with the president, and there's no analysis of some things he does is pretty good. I mean, renegotiating NAFTA need to be done, the Chinese things, and what you're talking about, okay. And it's, unfortunately, it's kind of split the country. I kind of try to look at, say, okay, Washington's always been a little bit like that, and it's just, I think his style is...
He has some good ideas, but some ways of doing these things just are difficult.
Put you on edge.
And on that. The thing is, we now, it's not only Congress that, Congress has been divided for a long time, but now, this lack of civility, not only in Congress, but just sometimes even out there in society, is not good for our country. I mean, we got to have civility. We got to work together. And unfortunately, right now, people are always looking, instead of looking for ways to work together, they look for differences. They look for differences. And when you look for differences instead of developing a consensus, that's not good for our country, and certainly not good for the way we function as a democracy.
Yeah, I know as lawyers, people always said, you argue like crazy and you get out in the hallway and you're friends and all that. And a little bit of Congress, I mean, you support your position in your party, but there was always your congressmen, your citizens and patriots first and all that. And you don't see that as much shaking hands afterwards or avoiding people in restaurants, right?
Yeah, which is very unfortunate because we might have political differences, but we should always keep our best interests in mind. The United States of America. I mean, our country should be number one. Unfortunately, we have, as you know, we have Democrats and Republicans. But I think President LBJ said it the best when he said, I'm an American, I'm a Texan, and I'm a Democrat, in that order. There are some people on both sides that sometimes put the party first, the Republican Party or the Democrat Party. And if you put party first, that's not good for our country.
You have a reputation for getting along in both, obviously, your party, but also getting along with the Republican side to get things done for our area. Has that been more difficult for you in the last 2 years, or?
I still get, some people criticize me for that, but I think the majority of people realize that we're not up there to make political messaging. I think what they want to see is, can a person come up, a member of Congress or a senator come up with a practical solution to a practical problem that we have out there. For example, Senator Cornyn, I worked with Senator Cornyn on many things. We worked on Nafta, we worked on NatBank, we worked on other things together, the public-private partnerships.
I've been on panels with you both.
Yeah, we've been on panels.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what people want to see is, can people roll up their sleeves and get the job? I mean, think about this. Let's say we're trying to get something done, let's say money for our highways, and say, Congressman, did you get money for the highways? Well, no, but I was able to really hit the other side. Well, were you able to get money for this bridge or for this road? No, but I was really able to hit the other side. People don't want to see that. No. I mean, when people say, they feel frustrated with the system, with this hyper-partisan, sometimes you include me in that, because sometimes I get frustrated with the way the system is. Sometimes there are weeks that you work very, very hard. You slow down when you're flying back, because I fly home every week, and I say, okay, we worked hard. What did we accomplish? I mean, that's the question you should always ask yourself. What were we able to accomplish? In appropriations, as an example, it's, we always have a saying. You have Republicans, you have Democrats, and then you got appropriators. In the appropriation committee, we work together. And to me, it doesn't matter if it's the Republicans are in charge or the Democrats. I prefer to have the Democrats in charge, of course. But I'm able to get certain things because I'm able to sit down and say, look, I'm trying to fix a problem. I'm not trying to just make a political point, because there are people on both sides that will put an amendment in the appropriation bill in committee just to make a political point and just to make the other person. And then they ask for a record vote. My thing is, look, and I would start off with, look, I'm not making a political point. I have this problem. I think I can fix it this way, or tell me how we can fix it this way. Can we add money here? Can we add some language here to fix a particular issue itself? And I can give you examples. For example, fever ticks, we were able to add language and monies for the fever ticks. The citrus, as you know, it's big here. I was able to work with a Republican from Florida, and myself as a Democrat, we added money to help protect the citrus, the greening disease that we have. So those are examples how Democrats and Republicans can work together.
It's kind of an interesting, as you were talking about that, you do a great job in bringing home the bacon to our
This is without earmarks.
Yes.
So imagine we got earmarks back. We could say, here's this money for this city, here's this money for this.
And we love that you do that. You're really good at it. So how do you tell a guy in Florida or Minnesota, that you have to go get somebody to help you, and then so you have to help them. And so how do you look at the big picture of the budget? You know, and I understand it. You know, we want you to do that, but we don't care about he does it or not. But you're the guy up in Washington that has to make those compromises. How do you look at the overall budget?
You know, it's interesting. In the appropriations, there's only one Democrat from Texas in the appropriation, myself. In fact, if you look at the surrounding 5 or 6 states around Texas, I'm the only Democrat. So what I do is I look at the 3 Republicans that are from Texas on the Republican side on the appropriations, and we say, hey, how do we make this work? For example, on the reimbursements for the humanitarian care, as you know, I had another model that
Right.
we were getting. We're supposed to have gotten monies that the federal government, over $100 million in the last few years, were sent to the state of Texas. You know, that model didn't work because the state didn't want to cooperate. They didn't want to look soft on providing humanitarian care. So what I did is I was able to add $30 million in there, and I told the Republicans from Texas, I said, hey, we got to do this. We're not going to take it from the state of Texas. We're going to take it from, we're going to create this new pot of money. So by just talking to them, said, we got a problem, they'll work with you on this. Right. So there are ways to do this by just sitting down and talking to people.
That's the way it gets done, though, right?
Yeah, and like for citrus, real quickly, on the citrus, Republican from Florida, they got citrus, we got citrus here. I said, hey, there's a problem. Can we work together? So when we put the money in, he makes a request, I make the request, and the money's there.
We might have to split this into 2 things, but I know one thing that you're really concerned about is health care.
Yes.
And where we are with health care and all those, the argument seems to be Obamacare or this or that, but there's a much more complicated issue than that just from a general standpoint.
Well, look, the affordable health care was not perfect. So what you do with the affordable health care, you look at what works, you keep that. The things that don't work, you modify or you repeal. That's the way most major piece of legislation is dealt with. Right. You keep what works, you get rid of or modify the things that don't work. But now you have new people that want to come in and say, I want to do Medicare for all. You know what the cost is for Medicare for all? It is
too much.
It's about $52 trillion. Not million, not billion, $52 trillion. If you have your private insurance, they take that away. It affects hospitals, it affects the rural areas, and it's expensive, and it just affects, by taking your private insurance. If somebody wants to go into a government, I don't see some of those legislators under a government. They have their own private insurance itself. So again, we want to have a system that works, and the way you do it is like, for example, if you have pre-existing, we agree on pre-existing, protecting people from pre-existing illnesses. The way insurance companies were taking advantage was bad. You keep things like that, and the things that don't work, you make changes. But you don't come and overhaul the system and come up with a $52 trillion budget.
No. In our small city, we have 2,000 employees, maybe a little less than that. Our health insurance is gone. We've been in the red $3 million a year for the last 4 years now. Because some of the changes, and there were needed changes, but it was things that we didn't have to, pre-existing conditions. But we had employees that were recent employees and had a spouse or whatever, and those things that we didn't anticipate. And so, we look at it and think, okay, we want to provide that, but we also have to balance it in our position with the taxpayers. Yes. And you want to give your employees cost of living increases at least, but how do you do that when you're creating deficit on your health care side? So a lot of people are dealing with that and looking for some sort of solutions to, it was needed, the coverage is needed, but how do you do that in smaller policies,
and unfortunately, when we passed the affordable health care, the state of Texas did not do Medicare expansion, even though there were billions of dollars available from the federal government. And unfortunately, the state of Texas did not create a state exchange. The state exchange was important because if you have a few insurance companies in the state of Texas that control the market, you know what's going to happen with prices. If you have competition, that should lower the prices down. So unfortunately, the state of Texas years ago did not create the state exchange, and they did not do some Medicaid expansion on that. The other thing is costs, like, for example, prescription drugs. One of the bills that we passed was a very simple concept. See if you agree with me on this one. The prescription drugs, we said the way we're going to lower the prescription drug, we are going to allow the federal government to negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies to lower prices. That's it. That's it. What's wrong with that? And or allow even importation drugs, let's say from another country, because a lot of times that, let's say something comes in from Canada or even here in Mexico, it's the same company, except it might be in French or it might be in Spanish, the label, but it's the same company.
Go to Progreso.
Yeah, Progreso, and the price is this big on this. Yeah. So why is it that we pay so much money in the United States for the healthcare system to other countries, but are the results better than other places? So, I mean, we gotta understand a way to bring some of those prices. Still keep the marketplace. But, I wish years ago the state of Texas would have done a couple things. On the CHIP program, they left hundreds of millions of dollars on the table. They didn't want to take it for the federal government. They could have set up a state exchange to create competition. They could have expanded some Medicaid, but they didn't want to do it. They left billions of dollars there. We could negotiate with pharmaceutical companies to lower down the prices. What's wrong with negotiating? We're not saying bring down the prices per se. We're saying, or capping them. We're just saying negotiate it. Let's work a better price. I think that would help. It won't solve all the problems. And there's other things, competition across state, the certain health savings. There's a lot of things that Democrats should look at, some ideas that the Republicans have, and Republicans should look at some ideas that the Democrats have, and then put it together and make it work.
It seems like we're hung up on the name.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly, Mayor. Exactly, Mayor. You're absolutely right.
Well, we covered a lot of material, and we got a lot more. And we didn't even talk about when you were in the state government way back when. It's been a few years.
I tell you,
20 years now? Or?
Yeah. State serving in the state, and I was just with Terry Canales, and I love the state. In the state, I created the Texas Grant, which is the largest scholarship in Texas history. Number one, I created the first CHIP program at the Farias Elementary School. The first pilot program with CHIP, and then I co-authored that statewide. So the state was a place where you could actually put money. We created the South Texas border initiatives that created the universities, because the border universities were getting so little money compared to other universities. So the state allows us, and I still talk to my colleagues, Senator Hinojosa, Eddie Lucio, and the other members of the state legislature. They have a job that they can really do a lot of good work, and I certainly salute my former colleagues.
Well, hopefully we could have you back so we can finish
Yes,
this conversation and really enjoy it. And thanks you for all you do in Washington, D.C.
Thank you so much, Mayor. And I have to say, I really appreciate your leadership. I think the public needs to understand you provide a new level of leadership, and I really appreciate your leadership and your commitment as the mayor of McAllen.
Well, this has been Congressman Henry Cuellar. Thank you very much.
Our team. Stories that count from people who care.